1. The devotee did not die well. That should be said first, because people have made it into something since. There was no last stand. There was no speech. On the third day of the Fourth Great Ninja War, at about 4 in the afternoon, Naruto Uzumaki was helping a Chunin from Kusa get his leg out from under a piece of rock, and a white Zetsu came out of the ground behind him and put a blade through his back and out the front of his chest. He said, "Oh." Then he sat down because his legs had stopped. The Chunin from Kusa was screaming. Naruto tried to tell him it was fine, and got about a third of the way through the word. And then the field went sideways and dark at the edges, and he thought, with a kind of mild embarrassment, "This is stupid. I'm not even doing anything important." And then he was gone. He was dead for 4 minutes and 40 seconds. The dark was not empty. That was the first surprise. There was text in it. It sat in the middle of nothing at a fixed distance from him, the way a word sits on a page. And it did not flicker or glow or announce itself. It was simply there, in plain characters, as though somebody had left a note. ACC count opened. Subject, Uzumaki. End status. Deck assist. Death reversible. Cost, 400. Cursed. Current. Balance, 0. Naruto looked at it for a while. He had no body to look with. He looked anyway. What? Insufficient balance. Balance. CR ed a valence. CR edit a valab. Author is what? Who is this? Where's what? Who is this? Where's oth? Wherelets? Transaction complete. He came back on the field with a hole in his chest that closed as he watched, and the Chunin from Kusa screaming into his ear, and a taste in his mouth like cold metal. He got up. The rock came off the man's leg like it was made of paper, somewhere behind his eyes. In a place that had not existed 20 seconds ago, small text appeared and stayed. Balance, 400. 2. The first purchase. It took him most of an hour to work out the shape of it, and he worked it out the way he worked everything out, which was by doing something reckless and watching what happened. A Zetsu came at him from the left. He put his hand up to block and thought very deliberately. Faster. S. Tardinen. Tier 1. Tyra 1. Cost, 40. A4 is, yeah, yes, whatever. Transaction complete. The Zetsu came apart against his forearm. He stood there with white pulp on his sleeve and did the arithmetic. 40. 400 to come back. So it was a currency, and it had prices, and he did not have any of it. Okay, he said out loud to nobody. Okay, so how do I pay? The text did not answer, and never answered a direct question. He learned that early and stopped bothering by the second day. But something else happened instead, about 6 seconds later, and it was so small that he almost did not register it. He thought about it Jiraku. He thought about it the way you think about a thing you love when you are exhausted and frightened, as a place to put your mind for a second, and he reached for what the miso tasted like, and there was nothing there. He knew he loved it. He knew he had eaten there 900 times. He could see the bowl and the counter and the old man's hands. The taste was gone, cleanly, entirely, with no ragged edge, as though it had been lifted out with tweezers. Debited, 1 times. Sensory, gustatory, low value. Credit, 40. Balance, 400. Naruto Uzumaki stood in a field full of corpses on the third day of the war and understood, with total clarity, that something had just gone into his head and taken a thing out and sold it to pay for a punch. He was going to think about that properly later. He did not get a later for 6 days. 3. Shikamaru. Shikamaru Nara noticed on the 4th day, and what he noticed was a hand gesture. It was 0940, command tent. Naruto was standing at the map table being briefed on the eastern collapse, and Shikamaru was talking, and at some point he said the word ramen as part of a supply logistics point about the field kitchens, and Naruto's hand moved, just slightly. It went toward his own mouth and stopped halfway and came back down. Shikamaru had known this idiot since they were 5 years old. He had watched him react to that word roughly 4,000 times. There was a specific face. It was extremely irritating, and it was completely automatic, and it had never once failed to appear. It did not appear. Naruto. You okay? Yeah, sorry, keep going, the Eastern thing. Shikamaru kept going. He also, without changing his expression, began a list in his head. And by the end of the war, that list had 206 entries on it. Entries 1 TL Furs, 12 A Virgid. Day 4, doesn't react to ramen. Doesn't notice he doesn't react. Day 4 later, killed 900 Zetsu in under an hour. No visible technique. No chakra spike registered by sensor division. Check twice, I know confirms. Day 5, called Kakashi Tessune with no inflection. Wrong. He says it like an insult and a hug at the same time. Today was a job title. Day 5. Asked him what Aruka's laugh sounds like as a test. He answered fast and confidently, and described it wrong. Described a laugh, not that one. Day 6. Writing this down because nobody else will. We were losing on day 3. We are winning on day 6. One person is responsible, and not a single officer in this command is asked how. Day 6. Asked him directly. He said, I got lucky. He has never in his life said that sentence. Day 7. Something is taking pieces out of him and putting power in the whole. Day 7. 2300. I have no evidence. I have no mechanism. I have a list of missing reactions and a body count. If I take this to the Kage, they will say battle stress, and they will be reasonable and they will be wrong. I'm going to watch. It's all I've got. 4. The Eliger. He found it on the 6th night. He had been trying to make the text answer questions for 3 days without success. And then on the 6th night, sitting alone behind a supply crate with his hands shaking from something that was not fatigue, he stopped asking questions and instead thought tiredly, "Show me what you've taken." And it did. The list was long. That was the thing that got him. He had been counting the big moments. He had authorized perhaps 40 transactions since the field, maybe 50, and he'd been braced for a list of 50 things. There were 430. Most of them were tiny. That was the design. And he understood the design in about 9 seconds of reading, and it was the most frightened he had been in his life, including the part where he was dead. Debited. 1 times sensory, gustatory, low value. Debited. 1 times Emery, AGE 6, non-critical. Debited. 1 ENI memory age 6, non-critical. Debited. 1 times preference, musical. Debited. 1 NC memory, age 9, non-critical. Debited 1 times capacity, humor, partial. He scrolled. He did not know how he was scrolling. The list kept going. It was taking the cheapest thing available every time, and it had started with things so small that he had no way of missing them, and it was working steadily upward because as the cheap things ran out, the cheapest remaining thing got more expensive. Entry 381 was debited. 1 I auditory voice tagged Umino Inka credited 340. Naruto sat behind a supply crate in the dark and tried to remember what Iruka's voice sounded like. He could remember that it was warm. He could remember being told he was going to be a great ninja by a man with a scar on his nose in a classroom with the windows open. He could not hear it. He was sick behind the crate for a while. Then he wiped his mouth and sat back against it, and looked at the running total and did the thing he was always going to do, which is why the system had picked him and not somebody else. Balance. 18,400. Okay, thought Naruto Uzumaki. What can I buy? 5. Sakura, day 7. She caught his wrist during a field triage on the 7th morning, and did not let go. Sit. Sakura-chan, I'm fine, I've got to. You have been running a diagnostic in my head for 4 days, and I want 30 seconds. Sit. He sat on an ammunition crate. She put 2 fingers on the inside of his wrist and closed her eyes and went in with medical chakra. And Naruto Uzumaki sat very still and watched her face and thought, distantly, that he had about 4 seconds before this became a problem. It took her 9. She opened her eyes. Your chakra network, she said slowly, is smaller than it was in March. Okay. Not damaged, not depleted, smaller. There is physically less of it than there was 5 months ago. And your output has gone up by something I can't measure with the equipment I have. Her hand tightened on his wrist. Naruto, that is not a thing that happens. That is not a thing that has ever happened to a human being. Huh, said Naruto. Weird. She stared at him. He held it. He was extremely good at holding it by then. He had been doing it for 4 days with Kakashi and 6 with Shikamaru, and it had got easier every time, which was its own quiet horror. You tell me, Sakura said. It was not a question, which meant she already knew the answer and was asking him to make her a liar. Course I would. She let go of his wrist. She got up and went back to the row of stretchers and did not speak to him for the rest of the day. And that night she wrote a 2-page clinical note that she did not file, and 11 years later she would still have it. 6. The price of winning. They will tell you the war turned on the 8th day at the ridge, and that is true in the sense that a receipt is true. Here is the ridge. The eastern face is a 2-kilometer slope of shale, steep at the top and shallowing out into scrub at the bottom, with a dry riverbed running along the base. 6,000 reanimated shinobi were coming down it in a solid front. The Alliance had 400 people in the riverbed holding a line that had been designed for 1,000, and was already open in 2 places. Kakashi was on the left with a broken collarbone, which meant he could hold a blade but could not raise his arm above the shoulder, which meant his entire left guard was gone, and everybody who could count knew it. Sakura had been operating for 19 hours, and had stopped being able to feel her hands. Naruto came up the riverbed alone, at a walk, and stood in front of it. Area suppression, tier 6, cost 12,000, authorize. Yes, insufficient assets of equivalent value. Nearest available, forward debit, authorize. He did not know what that meant. He had 4 seconds. And a front line coming apart in front of him. Yes, transaction complete. What happened to the ridge does not need describing at length. There is footage from a sensor unit 2 kilometers out, and it shows a flat white line and then no ridge. 6,000 reanimations were sealed in under a minute by a mechanism that no seal master in the Alliance has ever been able to reconstruct. Casualties on the Allied side, none. Naruto walked back down, and halfway down the receipt came in. Forward debit proxist, asset, future effant, tagged Porbin, Hokage, 7th friend. Hokage, 7th this. Value, 12,000. Asset removed. He stopped on the slope. He read it 4 times. Then he said, in a voice that did not carry more than about a meter, that hasn't happened yet. Correct. It was the only time in the entire war that it answered him. 7. Watatsugulast. The last 11 days of the 4th Great Ninja War were, by every measure anyone has ever applied, the most one-sided military campaign in recorded history. Nobody on the Allied side has ever been comfortable talking about it. Kakashi Hatake was asked about it once, on record, and said, "We were spectators from about the 8th day. That's not modesty. We stood on hills and watched." Sakura Haruno was asked what she remembered and said, "He kept apologizing to me. I never worked out for what." Shikamaru Nara's list ran to 206 entries by the 21st day, and he never showed it to anyone, and it is still in a locked drawer in his house. And every so often he takes it out and reads it and puts it back. Here's what Naruto Uzumaki spent at the end. Not the ridge. The ridge was cheap by comparison. The end of the war cost more than everything before it put together. Because Madara Uchiha was not 6,000 corpses on a slope, and the system priced accordingly, cost 96,000. No current assets of equivalent value, forward debit required, authorize. He was standing in a crater with a broken jaw and one working arm. Behind him, at 400 meters, Sakura was trying to get an airway into a boy from Kumo who had about 90 seconds left. What's it going to take? Q. Worry not regonicit. Authorizans. What is it going to take? Authorize. He authorized it. The receipt printed itself behind his eyes, while Madara Uchiha was still falling. Forward debit proxist. 3 assist. 1 times. Relationship spousal doer. 1 times. Pension F. B. 2019. 1 times. Pension M. B. 2021. Value E. 96,000. Assets removed. He read it standing up. He read it 4 times. The way he had read the one on the slope. Because his brain kept getting to the second line and refusing to continue and going back to the top. Then he sat down in the crater. Person F. Born 2019. That was 5 years away. He did not know what he was supposed to feel, because there was nothing to feel about. There was no face. There had never been a face. There was no name, no laugh, no first day of school, no argument about vegetables, no small hand in his. None of it had happened, and now none of it was going to. And he had no way of knowing whether it ever would have. He would never know. That was the specific cruelty of the thing, and it had been engineered. He sat in the crater, and he cried, hard, for about 6 minutes. For 2 people who did not exist, and now definitely never would, in a way that nobody who found him afterward was ever able to explain, because as far as anyone could see, he had just won the war and everybody had lived. 8. Wat Shikamaru, never proved. Entry 206, dated 3 weeks after the surrender. It's over and I still have nothing. He's fine. That's the official position and I can't argue with it because he is, by every test, chakra normal, cognition normal. Emotionally he presents as tired, which so does everyone. Things I know and cannot prove. 1. He does not want to be Hokage. Asked him twice. First time he said, yeah, someday, in the voice you use for a thing you're supposed to say. Second time he looked confused for about a second and a half before he answered. That second and a half is the only piece of hard evidence I have, and it isn't evidence. 2. He asked Sakura last month, out of nowhere, whether she thought people could tell if something had been taken out of them. She said, it depends what. He said, yeah, probably, and changed the subject. 3. He has stopped making plans further out than about a year. Not dramatically, he just doesn't. I've watched for it. Everyone else in this village is talking about 10 years from now, and he talks about next spring. Conclusion: something enormous happened to Naruto Uzumaki during that war, and it is finished and it is not coming back, and I will never know what it was. I think that's the point of it. I think whatever did this designed it so that the only person who could report it is the only person who'd have to explain what he sold. 9. ACC count closed. He was alone in his apartment when it settled. It had been quiet for 3 weeks. No prompts. No offers. He had half expected it to keep going, to start selling him things in peacetime, and it had not, and the silence had been almost worse. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, while he was doing the washing up, hostilities conclanned, reconciled 18 hitch count. He put the bowl down. Total debted, 16810, 416 secometers. Total expended, 168,400. Balance, 0. A pause. Long enough that he thought it had finished. ACC count closed. He stood at the sink with his hands in the water. He had questions. He'd been assembling them for a month, carefully, in order, the way you do when you know you get one shot at a thing. He asked the one that was underneath all the others. The 2 kids, he said, out loud, to an empty kitchen. Were they ever real? Corey not recognizant. Were they going to happen? If I'd said no. If I'd let the ridge go. If I'd let... His voice went. He got it back. Were they real? Corey not recognized. ACC count closed. Thank you for your custom. And then, after a moment, one more line. It was not addressed to him. He is fairly sure of that. It had the shape of something left visible by accident, the way a page of somebody else's notes gets left in a folder. Other axed accounts active too. Then nothing. Naruto Uzumaki finished the washing up. He is 34 now. He is the 6th Hokage's senior field commander, and he is very good at it. And he has turned down the hat twice, once politely and once badly, and Kakashi has stopped asking. He lives alone. He does not particularly mind. He eats at Ichiraku 3 times a week. because Takuchi is old, and the shop is warm and Ayame asks after him, and because the taste never came back and he has decided that going anyway is the only argument he has left against the thing that took it. Every so often, in a meeting, somebody says the words 10 years from now, and Naruto Uzumaki writes something down in his notebook and does not look up, and the meeting carries on, and Shikamaru Nara, 4 seats down, notices. He always notices. He has never once said anything.